I hope that we can all unite against this type of egregious behavior that not only makes us all look bad, but could destroy the commentary community as we know it. My fear is that Sony or Disney comes along, sues everybody, and sets a devastating precedent that could endanger our entire field.
That's what I take to be the savior rationale, that this lawsuit is about protecting the commentary community by enforcing a standard on the commentary community. That very clearly is one of the rationales. Agree? That is what he's trying-
if you put it that way, sure.
It's fine if you have a vendetta against these people and that's why you want to sue them, but then just admit it. I wouldn't have a problem. I wouldn't be doing this, but everyone is saying, no, he never said that. He never claimed to be a savior, and he is being a savior, and this is a justifiable line, and he did pre-plan it. It doesn't pass the smell test. And that's why I resent even more when an independent thinker sees through that bullshit and calls it out. All of a sudden the friends come in and say, oh, you're just trying to cozy up to Hasan. Oh, you're this and that. F***ing absurd. And I'm glad you came on here and you're acknowledging something about this story doesn't make sense. Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description. Tom is fair. We have you. All right. So talk me through what's going on in your mind. What's happening? What are your disagreements? I didn't see if you tweeted at me. I didn't see that. So just let us know what your thoughts are on things.
Yeah, so I guess first off, I do think that like his the entire complaint from Ethan's lawyer was just a meme. I think that's what it was meant to be. You kept talking about how cringe it was. I agree. I think it was meant to be cringe. I think that's like part of why it's kind of funny. You might think that that's like not the place to be funny. Totally understand that, like that position that's just kind of inappropriate. But there were a bunch of other things that like where the facts were just getting confused by a lot of people, like a lot. So I posted like a 5-minute video just kind of like showing the takes and what was happening. But one of them is that Denims, everybody keeps comparing how much Denims was reacting to the Hasan nuke versus XQC. Denims is not being sued for her reaction to the Hasan nuke. Her reaction to the stream before the Hasan nuke is what he went over in his video, where she's just sitting there. She gets up and goes to the bathroom.
She is being sued. She's being sued for both.
Yeah, I guess it would have to be both because her statement about the like with her intent to replace him in the market, that is that I guess applies to the Hasan nuke and not the stream.
Well, let's just talk about facts here. Facts are she's being sued for her reaction to both. Correct?
I don't know. That's the part, is that my understanding was that it was about her reaction to the stream, but he was taking her comments that applied to the Hasan nuke and using this as intent to replace him in the market while reacting to the stream. So when he went over her video on his video about this, he's showing her reacting to the stream, not to the
So one thing I'm going to do to figure this out is I'm just going to go to the prayer of relief. It says that first claim for relief against Denims. These are the allegations. They incorporate by reference the entire complaint. It states that the entity that's in charge, TEI, is the entity here, is the sole owner, sole of. They fucking typos everywhere. It says sole of the copyrights. So just to be clear, this complaint is dog shit because it wasn't proofread, because it's formatted fucking shittily, because it's a meme, so it's dog shit. And that's just another example of it. They registered their copyright, that Denims accessed the countdown episode and the nuke, that they did not grant authorization or consent to exploit the content or the nuke, and that due to the Denims acts of copyright infringement, they have suffered damages for her infringement in the countdown episode and the nuke. And so now that I've read that from the first claim of relief, from the prayer of relief, or sorry, before the prayer of relief, but for the cause of action, will you agree, therefore, that you were wrong when you said, or when you supposed, that it wasn't about the nuke? She's also being sued for her reaction to the nuke, correct?
No,
yes or no?
I don't know if it's for her No, I don't think that it's her reaction to the nuke, because as I said, I think that she has stated an intent to be a replacement within the market.
Hang on a second. Is H3 suing Denims for her copyright infringement of the nuke?
I think so, but I don't think it's for her reaction.
So were you wrong?
I think it's for market replacement.
Wait, no, but hang on a second. he is only suing Denims for copyright infringement, correct?
Yes, but that
Okay.
is these are different things. Like so when I said that you're comparing what how much XQC is reacting to it versus how much she is reacting to it, that hers is a 4-hour VOD, XQC's is a 2-hour VOD. She does like no? Am I
So you're
misunderstanding this?
misunderstanding. So there's a broader misunderstanding we'll get to in a second. But just to be clear about what he's suing her for, he's suing her for exactly one thing: copyright infringement, and that copyright infringement pertains to both the content nuke and the countdown episode, not just one or the other. And there's only one thing, and it's the same thing he's suing for both of those things: infringement. There's only one thing at issue. I just want to bring us back to where we were, which is he is suing Denims for infringement and only infringement as pertains the copyright that he holds in countdown episode and the nuke, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you were incorrect.
They're both infringements. Yes.
Yeah. So you were incorrect when you were like, you're misconstruing that, because he's not suing her for the nuke. That was wrong.
Okay. So when it comes to market replacement, I agree that like these are both fair use, but my point is that they're not both about how much you're reacting. I think her like content nuke is going to be fair use. I think it is. Like watching it, going over it, like she doubles the amount of time, the amount of runtime in her reaction, and is like, she is talking. Yes, she's pausing literally like every 30 seconds to a minute. I couldn't even find a spot where she went 3 minutes without pausing. So I think she's going to have like fair use for the content nuke, but from everything that he said about it and from what I read in the complaint, it looked like he was saying that it was that yes, it was not transformative in the way that she reviewed the interview, and then she had a statement of intent to replace him in the market in the content nuke, but even the entire argument that the lawyer made almost made it sound like they're making an argument for the content nuke purely based off the intent stated, which obviously isn't enough to actually be infringement, just intent by itself.
Yeah. So I guess I want to step back again and say, I just want to make sure we're agreeing that Denims is being sued for both the nuke and the interview, the countdown episode, correct? I thought you said now I'm understanding you to be saying like, well, there's a different kind of analysis as pertains both, and maybe they're using her stated intention as pertains the nuke to kind of help bolster the case of infringement or preempt the argument of fair use when it comes to the countdown episode, and that's why that's included. Is that what you're arguing?
Yes, that is my understanding from.
I don't know that I disagree with you. I don't know if I have strong opinions about what their intent is in including things. I certainly don't have a strong opinion on that. But it also has nothing to do with any of my stated opinions or why I'm getting pushback. Because for the sake of all of what I'm saying, I'm conceding and agreeing that there's probably at least some infringement here. And I've said that over and over. Mm-hmm. So none of why there's controversy into what I'm saying has to do with a question about whether or not it's infringement or not. Because my agreement is, my opinion is that it probably is infringement. And so when you're saying, well, I'm misconstruing certain arguments or I'm applying something, it doesn't matter because I've said that this is probably infringement. So it's not why people are mad at me, is because everyone can see me saying this is probably infringement. This is most likely infringement.
Yeah. So I have a couple of different points.
Mm-hmm.
Other one is that Ethan cut XQC out of context. One of the things that was brought up a number of times by you and a bunch of other people.
Wait, when did I say that Ethan cut XQC out of context?
You didn't. I'm saying Ethan cut him out of context. So you were talking about the fact that XQC straight up says, I don't care about copyright or whether or not it's illegal, right? He just straight up
has said that
I don't
before,
care whether or not it's illegal.
So I have an independent memory of him saying something to that effect multiple times. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I happen to think it's my...
he does.
Okay. So what is wrong about that?
He does say it, but there's extra context right after that I think totally changes it, and is my argument when it comes to a lot of these things, is that he's stating it's not stealing unless the owner says it's stealing. That the cops aren't just going to come after you just because you didn't react hard enough or something. It's stealing when the person who who owns the content, who owns the IP, says it's stealing. So just the same as somebody goes into my shed and takes my lawnmower and puts it back afterwards. If I like that person and we're friendly, I don't really care. I'm not going to say anything. If it's somebody down the road that I don't like and they take my lawnmower, I'm calling the cops. So they both did the same exact thing. I decide when it's stealing.
As a statement of law, that's not correct, and also doesn't matter for any of my points. So I grant to you that he said that. Number one, he's wrong about that, right? Like, whether or not someone cares to sue me or afterwards ratifies the what was done or the reaction doesn't bear on whether at the moment it's done, it is infringement or theft in the case of the example that you're trying to provide. Like, if I go and steal a lawnmower from your place without permission, without any kind of implied relationship there or anything, right? I just go and steal a lawnmower and or take it and bring it back and use it as though it were my own. Whatever the problem is there, it could be conversion or some other tort. I don't know if you're not maybe trying to permanently deprive you. So whatever the tort is there occurred regardless of the fact that afterwards you ratified that action. At the time that you're depriving me of possession, or in this case infringing, the infringement occurs. Now, carve out if there's an implied relationship or some kind of license, an implied license, or even an explicit license. That's not what we're talking about. So just number one, overall, XQC is wrong about that. And number two, that doesn't contradict anything I've said or anything anyone's talking about.
Okay, I do think you used that argument a couple of times to say that like a XQC was a greater a threat to IP, and then that takes me to the last one, which is that he is also a greater threat to people like Sony and Disney stepping in.
Yeah. So let's talk about that real quick. What I said is XQC in the terms of malicious from a legal perspective. I understand that Ethan may be using the term malicious to mean intentional siphoning of his specific work, and so he's using it not as a legal term of art. So, and I've recognized that in my video, and I've recognized this entire time. So there's zero equivocation on my part with the use of that term. I'm conscious of that words can be used in different ways, and I'm conscious of a threat of equivocation. I'm not equivocating. So, my point is that XQC legally is malicious in the sense that he has reckless disregard for whether or not he's siphoning this revenue or whatever, right? He doesn't care about the law, but that's not to put him on all fours with Denims and these other people in every respect. I recognize that Denims and these other people probably have a greater, commonplace definition of the term malice. That is to say, they literally want to steal money from Ethan in that respect. And maybe the XQC doesn't have that. I do not dispute that at all. What I'm saying is, he says in his video that he doesn't want to chill XQC, even though XQC is an infringer. Maybe it's a less form of infringement in his opinion because it doesn't include that intentional taking away from his revenue or whatever. But he says he wants to protect the XQCs of the world, these infringers who don't give a fuck if they're siphoning revenue or not. And that, I think, is not consistent with the conduct here or the actual motivations of what's going on. And especially when he says, I want to prevent Sony and Disney from setting a bad precedent and destroying the reaction community as we know it, they're much more likely to do that, all else equal, towards the bigger reactor. They don't give a fuck about whether you have good intent or bad intent. What they care about is the sort of market substitution effect and how much it's affecting their bottom line, which is going to be largely influenced by the size of the infringer, not their mal motive.
So I'll come back to the Sony part then, because I disagree with the part about XQC. I do think that it's maybe just a semantic issue here, but I would say that yes, it's not stealing until the person decides that it's stealing, and that there is a culture online where people, especially smaller creators, would want somebody like XQC to watch their video on his streams, even if he doesn't give them credit, even if he doesn't tag them in it or link them in it, that people are more likely to go look for them, find them, and then subscribe to their channel if they like it. And so there is a culture that is that almost that implied consent. And he's saying if they don't like it, they can go through YouTube and just say, I don't like this. It'll get taken down. That's that. And then we move on. But they decide when it is an infringement, and that 99% of the people don't ever decide that it's an infringement. Therefore, this is the culture of this implied consent already.
I don't really care about that. He's wrong about that, right? So he's wrong. Like, it isn't the fact that there's ever been the case that individuals have to like preemptively give XQC notice that it's not okay for infringement to not occur. So we don't have to take on his weird and distorted view of infringement. I'll give you tons of examples. Example one, where the person has no way of knowing whether XQC is infringing on the content, and it takes months and months for them to even be aware that XQC is infringing. Someone who doesn't want this to happen, it doesn't even want to happen the first time, right? And so I just don't accept XQC's framework, and I also don't think it's relevant to what we're talking about here. The question is, what is Ethan's motivation? What is actually motivating Ethan? That's the essence of my critique is the following. Why is Ethan choosing to go after some people and not others? And what I take to be the disingenuous part is he is not going after Denims and all to protect the React community. That is not what's happening. And if you agree with that, then we have no disagreement that I can see.
Okay, so the reason that I was trying to get the XQC part out of the way is because I agree he's not doing that.
Okay.
I also don't think he ever said he was doing that. I don't think that ever happened.
Right. So just to be clear, we agree he's not doing that. So now the question is, did he put himself out as doing that? And the answer unequivocally to that is yes, he did. Example number one. In his video, how he starts it, he talks generally about the problem of blatant infringement outside the context of intentional siphoning. And this is in the context of this YouTuber that he props up, I forget his name, where he gives that little neat graphic where someone reacts like a lot versus when they don't, and what's the problem, what's not the problem. He calls that situation an injustice.
I mean, people don't like injustice, and we all see this and know it's not right.
He calls XQC a prime suspect. And then he, about 3 or 4 minutes later, says, I want to get together and get some people behind me to promote a healthy environment. Otherwise, it could destroy the content community, reaction community as we know it.
I hope that we can all unite against this type of egregious behavior that not only makes us all look bad, but could destroy the commentary community as we know it. The state of reaction content on Twitch is so broken, these creators feel comfortable looking right into a camera and saying outright, hey, I'm stealing this guy's content. Pay me instead of him. This is not a healthy environment. And with people like Hasan reacting to entire TV shows on stream, my fear is that Sony or Disney comes along, sues everybody, and sets a devastating precedent that could endanger our entire field.
He then says that this is done in part to prevent Sony and Disney from setting bad precedent, and specifically that he does not want to chill XQC. And so all this taken in totality indisputably suggests that he is painting at least one of his significant motivations as protecting the commentary community, protecting the React community. Otherwise, why would he bring up Sony and Disney and the notion of setting bad precedent? Why would he talk about the risks to the commentary community as we know it if he weren't trying to appeal to the possibility of an existential threat to that community? Explain that.
So I think these are separate statements. I think in one statement, he is saying he personally does not want the outcome of his lawsuit to chill the React community. He is somebody who reacts to videos as well. He wouldn't want to hurt himself in this way either. But also, as a separate statement, because these statements are separated, then he also says that he has a fear that Sony and Disney could eventually come after people if this is like a slippery slope to where people are just kind of recklessly and maliciously replacing things in the market.
Wait a second. So I want to just, this is the quote. Though theoretically I could sue a lot more creators and rake in millions of dollars. So just to be clear, that is him suggesting that other creators are infringing, right? Not that they're doing fair use, because he couldn't rake in millions if they weren't infringing, right? So we're only talking about infringement here, okay? So he says the following: though theoretically I could sue a lot more creators and rake in millions of dollars, But the purpose of this is not financial gain. People like XQC and Asmongold may have watched the entire thing, but I would never sue them just for doing that. I don't want to chill the reaction community into fear, actually. The opposite. I hope that we can all unite against this type of egregious behavior that not only makes us all look bad, but could destroy the commentary community as we know it. That is a savior rationale. It's saying everyone, including, we need to bandy together to protect the XQCs of the world and the Asmongolds of the world. Otherwise, we'll all look bad and it could destroy the commentary community as we know it. That's a broader narrative, that this type of egregious behavior, if we don't band together, right? If we don't all band together to unite, it could destroy our community. Isn't that, and I'll just very simple, isn't that a savior rationale that speaks to him trying to achieve broader protection of the community?
I guess in a sense, I think he's just asking for like some consistent rationale between everybody to where they're all going to agree. This is bad. This is good. I'm on y'all's side. I don't want to chill all reaction content, but there is a type of reaction content that we should all agree crosses the line. And I think he's more so arguing in favor of himself. So because currently there are tons of people in the reaction community. Hold on, let me finish this. Because people in the reaction community are currently going after him, saying that he is chilling the reaction community and he's ruining it. And I think he's trying to like prevent that ahead of time and try to make sure that they don't come after him and think that he's trying to stop all of this.
Okay, so let's take it step by step. Does Ethan agree that there's an existential risk to the commentary community?
I with the Sony and like Disney thing, I think that he thinks there's a slippery slope where this can get out of hand.
Well, no, but he says that this type of behavior, that is to say, the Denims style behavior, that this type of behavior could destroy the commentary community as we know it. So I'm asking you very directly, based on that statement, is Ethan describing a type of existential risk to the commentary community?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he is partly painting his lawsuit in terms of protecting against an existential risk against the commentary community, correct?
His lawsuit, sure. I think it's more so their behavior is the existential threat.
Right. And so he's trying to...
Their behavior is the existential threat.
Right. Yeah. So their behavior... Exactly. Their behavior is the type of egregious behavior that, quote, not only makes us all look bad, but could destroy the commentary community. And so he, and I just want to get a very clear yes or no, he is saying that his lawsuit is done, at least in part, to prevent this kind of egregious behavior that, quote, could destroy the commentary community as we know it, correct?
No, I don't know where you're getting that part from. Like, again,
how not?
It is because I think he's just asking, again, I think he's just asking for everybody to be consistent on this and not blame him as though he is chilling the commentary community. But he's saying, for me and for other people who have this violation against them, they would want to act on this and sue people who violate their content in this way.
And that's why he wants us all to unite, right? He's saying unite. He's saying unite. We should all be on the same page here, because when we go after these people, it's going to prevent the destruction of the commentary community, right? That's why he's saying we can all unite against this type of egregious behavior. He wouldn't be saying that if it were just limited to himself and trying to reassure people. He's not just trying to... Wait, Tom, you agree with this? He's not just trying to, as you're trying to paint it, reassure people that his specific lawsuit isn't going to chill the community. He's actually doing something broader and saying there's a bigger risk here and we all need to unite against this type of behavior to prevent the destruction of the community. Not just my lawsuit, right? It's his lawsuit is part of a culture that he's trying to promote against this type of egregious behavior for the purpose of preventing the destruction of the commentary community as we know it. Agreed?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. Yes, that is what I'm saying. I'm saying that's what that is very different than he is the savior, but more so that there is a consistent line that we should all agree on. That's totally different than I'm here to save you, but instead we all agree on this, right? This is a line they did cross.
He is trying to portray his lawsuit as protecting the commentary community, isn't he?
No, I think it's
No?
him saying that all people should agree that they would sue over something like this, and that like this isn't something that is supposed to go after a broad array of people. It is going after specific people who do this specifically, not all commentary people.
No, I understand the target here, right? That he's trying to portray is a more narrow target. I'm not disputing you that his target is, as he portrays it, is more narrow. All I'm saying, Tom, is he is portraying his lawsuit as a reaction, a justified reaction that's justified in part by protecting the commentary community. That is to say, people in general need to unite against this style of behavior, this type of egregious behavior, for the purpose of making us not all look bad and making it so that the commentary community is not destroyed. So he's trying to say that this lawsuit is the opposite of trying to chill. This is what he says, right? I'm not trying to chill the reaction community into fear. The opposite. I'm trying to do the opposite. What's the opposite of trying to chill the reaction community? It's to promote the reaction community, right? Correct? So
he's saying he's part of that community, yeah.
He's saying, I'm not trying to chill them. I'm trying to do the opposite, which is another way of protecting the community. He's trying to portray his lawsuit as not just vindicating his own rights, but as protecting the commentary community. Agreed?
I guess, again, I wouldn't say it that way. I think that is an odd way to say it, because again, it's like me. Okay. I do React content. Okay. I do a lot of, like, about, I would say maybe half of my content is React content. And I am also going to sue people who are just stealing my content, just re-uploading it, putting about 3 minutes of commentary in there with an hour and a half of my fucking content just re-uploaded, right? And I would say make the same arguments, just saying like, yeah, this is something that like hurts all of us when people go past this line and start this process where we're having to like sue each other, right?
And if you sue Tom,
down.
If you sue Tom and you said this is about preventing the existential threat to our community, and you would defend yourself, you say, I'm not trying to harm the commentary community, the opposite. I'm trying to protect us because this makes us all look bad. And so when I sue these people, it's to vindicate my rights, but it's also to protect the community. That's what he's suing here. And that's why, by the way, he starts with this broader concern from creators and saying this is about, this is an injustice every time it happens, with reference to that content creator, whoever he was. What he's trying to do is he's trying to make the argument that his lawsuit is doing the opposite of chilling, that it's actually protecting. It's protecting the commentary community. And that is why he says we all need to unite. He's trying to portray, and I think if you dispute this, I don't know what the problem, I think you're doubling down.
I agree. Okay, again, I can agree that in a sense it is protecting in the fact that it is drawing the line that he thinks should be there. I don't think that makes him the hero, but more so that a line being there is what protects us. That line is the thing that we should all agree on, because it will protect us from disappearing.
And what I'm doing right now is helping promote that line. That's what he's saying. Yes. So that's what I take to be the savior rationale, that this lawsuit is about protecting the commentary community by enforcing a standard on the commentary community. Agreed?
If you put it that way, sure. I think it's a semantic difference in the way that you put it.
I don't think it's semantic difference. I think it's a meaningful difference.
Because initially your statement was that he's protecting everybody from Disney, and that is a very different way of saying it. Whereas this is he's drawing a line that will stop a slippery slope from them eventually coming down on us.
No, none of it's so. That's what I take to be the savior rationale. That is that this lawsuit is justified in part by protecting the React community. By someone, and that's the question that, right? It says destroy the commentary community, right? From who? Who's going to destroy the commentary community, right? Like, what do you mean? Where is this existential threat coming from? And I'll ask you, when he says this could destroy the commentary community, why? Why would it destroy the commentary community to allow this egregious behavior? Why would it destroy it? And I'll ask you, Tom, why would it allow it? Why would allowing this egregious behavior bring about the destruction of the commentary community? Go.
Because I think that for for YouTube, if it over and over we start to have more and more lawsuits because commentary community is stealing content, eventually they're just gonna be like, no more fucking reviewing other
Right.
people's shit on streams anymore.
That's why he has to bring up Sony and Disney, because he has to explain that there's an existential threat, and that existential threat isn't coming from him. It's not coming from insiders. It's coming from outsiders. And who are the outsiders? Sony, Disney. So this rationale is consistent throughout, right? There's an existential threat. It's coming from outside. I'm here to protect you guys from that, because by me enforcing the standard, it's going to prevent the destruction of the community. Why? Because the outsiders are going to be less inclined to come and sue people and set bad precedent. That's what he's saying, and that's why he brings up Sony and Disney, because it's part of his narrative that this lawsuit is meant to actually protect the community from the outsiders, from Sony and Disney. And I'm thoughtful about that. And so don't say that what I'm doing here is trying to chill people. It's the opposite. I'm trying to promote the community by protecting it against the outsiders. That's the narrative that I take to be the savior narrative, and that's what I think is bullshit.
Okay, I think that, yeah, I say the same exact thing, and
Okay.
but the narrative is more so that if we all held this line, we will be better off in the long run. We all agree together this line exists, and we like culturally promote that line, call people out for it, or even like take down videos that are doing these sorts of things, then we're able to kind of save ourselves.
But the thing is, it's bullshit. It's a bullshit thing to say, and it's not what's actually motivated him. And there's a lot of indication of that. So you agree, by the way, he did say it. He is saying that he's trying to protect the content community from Sony and Disney, right? And entities like that. Yes or no?
I don't think he is trying to protect the community, no, but I think that he's saying if we all draw this line, that protects the community.
He's trying to sell him
a couple of times that like
he's trying to sell his lawsuit as in part being justified by protecting the commentary community from Sony and Disney.
He is part of one of the people who
Yes.
would draw this line, so he is also in part protecting, as everybody
Correct.
who would protect this line would be
But
protecting.
you said
the
he didn't
community.
say that. If you scroll back 10 minutes ago, you said he never said that. Of course, he's not doing that. He never said it. But now you're saying he did say it.
No. Just a minute ago, we agreed that he is talking about the line that he is protecting, and that we all protect this line, we would be protecting the community at large. Whereas very different than he himself is protecting the community. Like that's a little bit different.
Well, if he's part of the movement, if he's spearheading, if he's being a leader here, right, which he thinks himself as. By the way, his complaint starts with Ethan Klein is this wonderful guy who set this amazing precedent in the SDNY. So he very much has a savior complex, and it's throughout the complaint. If you read at all between the lines, he's portraying himself as the defender of fair use, the standard bearer, and so I completely disagree that he thinks he's just part of the cog of the machine. He views himself as a leader. But even if you this is a distinction without a difference. He's saying that his lawsuit is about enforcing that line, and whether it's his specific lawsuit that's going to save everyone, or he's going to be part of a movement that saves everyone, to me is a distinction without a difference. Either way, he's trying to sell his lawsuit as protecting, either by starting a trend or by being the thing itself of preventing the destruction of the commentary community because of the outsiders of Disney and Sony, places like that, from suing. That is a rationale where it seemed you were implying it wasn't a rationale and that he didn't ever even suggest it or say it.
Again, I do think that his entire even taking a lot of stuff from his complaint, I even have trouble with it just because it's just so flamboyant and memeish that it seems like he's purposely doing that just to piss people off.
I'm gonna get a little lead, Tom. I'm gonna get a little
the video that he's stating. But the video that he's stating, that is the line that we were talking about, is the statement from the video, is that is what we were talking about, is in that statement. Yes, he is talking about a line.
Wait, but that line is justified by protecting the reaction community. He's saying, I need to do this. I need to sue these people, or one of the reasons why I'm suing these people is to protect the community, or whether it's because of the line or the standard, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, he's enforcing some standard that is meant to protect the commentary community. That very clearly is one of the rationales. Agree?
Sure.
Okay. Yes. Awesome. That's my point. That's one of my points. And you already agreed that he's not doing that. And so at this point, I mean, like, you agree with me on that. We agree. We agree that the complaint is dog shit. And you agree that one of his rationales was to defend their commentary community, and that's bullshit. And so what do we disagree about?
Well, I don't know. You just said it's bullshit again. I would say that my lawsuit would also do the same thing, is like setting the standard that like people are going too far, and that by suing, I am also taking part in setting the standards to where like things don't go too far and don't go down the slippery slope to where it is the same exact thing.
So do you actually
that you're claiming he's saying? But
do you actually believe that?
But I would say that yes, that is a very real thing. Yes, that is a very real.
So you actually now believe that one of them is motivating Ethan is to protect against Disney and Sony's of the world by enforcing a standard. Do you think that's one of his rationales?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. I thought you said like, that you didn't believe that.
His rationale. No. Sorry. No. His rationale. No. Is that what he's arguing? That yes. But is that his rationale? No. He's finding a rationale that lets him go after the people that he wants to go after.
Boom.
Well, almost definitely.
Boom. That's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this is not what's actually motivating him. What's motivating him is going after the people he wants to go after, not this feeling that he needs to protect the commentary community. But even though he says that, right? He says he's trying to protect the commentary community, but what's really motivating him, and it's fine. You go after people you don't like in lawsuits who are infringing your shit, but don't sell me this bullshit that what you're doing is defending the commentary community, because that's clearly what you're not doing, and that's not what's motivating you.
Sure, but I also think that like anything that's past that line is where we would all agree. Whereas like it is common that you can find people who are reacting, but they're not doing it maliciously. They're not trying to like steal your stuff. They're not trying to replace you in the market. They're not trying to just like sit there and have a watch party. That like if they are trying, most of us would like call somebody out for suing people unnecessarily and kind of that would chill the commentary community. We would call that sort of behavior out. So I think
this is Tom, what I take to be the essence here, right? Because the problem is what XQC is doing is wrong, and Ethan's been on record saying it's wrong.
Okay, I shouldn't say wait. Commentary community would. The commentary community would. I wouldn't. I think that yes, you review somebody's stuff, you are always at risk. Always. You are always at risk.
And XQC and Ethan has been vociferous in criticizing not just the people where their stated intent is to siphon money. He's been saying that what XQC does is unjustifiable. And XQC has these arguments, these bizarre arguments about how it helps them, actually, the infringer. And like you said at the start, right, that what he's doing really is trying to promote their stream, or that it should be the default is you have to do a takedown before it's infringement or whatever. And so Ethan needs to invent this rationale, because he's oftentimes been, I think, rightly attacking people like XQC for doing the non-malicious infringement, right? For doing the kind of infringement where he's actually trying to justify and say, I'm not being malicious in the sense of siphoning things intentionally. And so he needs to twist himself into knots in trying to maintain a consistent position of attacking XQC in the past, but not trying to chill XQC in the present. And so it's this tortured rationale, because the truth is what you just said, Tom. The truth is it would be deeply unpopular if he were to sue XQC. But that would be consistent with his past position, which is that even the unintentional siphoning, or the siphoning where their goal is actually to promote, if it's infringement, but it's promoting the other stream, that is bad by itself. That's why he's choosing to go after these people, and why he has to knot himself into pretzels, is because he knows suing XQC would be unpopular, condemning XQC would be unpopular, which is why he says that he doesn't want to chill XQC, and he doesn't care to sue XQC. Why? Because he doesn't have a vendetta against XQC. And it's fine if you have a vendetta against these people and that's why you want to sue them, but then just admit it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as long as you're saying that, like, yes, he's saying that, like, there's this line, and that this line is what distinguishes him from the other people, but that's what you mean when you say he's the hero, fine. I don't have a problem with that. That is not what I took it as, is not what a lot of people I know heard you say took it as, but that, yes, that is what I'm saying. That is what I agree on. And the fact that, yes, he is definitely doing this because he just doesn't like them, and that this is the rationale that, like, furthers that, but more so this distinguishes him from coming after the commentary overall versus like just, you know, people who are a little bit more
ad hoc,
malicious.
right? It's post hoc, and it's not what he was
Right,
thinking
right.
before he did all this, right? He wasn't
Correct,
thinking.
but
he was setting a trap.
Do you think he would do it? Do you think he would do it if they like, because I think I think it's both. I think it's that he doesn't like them, and because they were overly malicious in the way they did it, this now gives him the ability, but it is both, that it has to like, if it was something that was broad sweeping, if they didn't say the malicious things,
you asked me a
he would
question,
have
right?
gone after them anyways.
Yeah, you're asking me that question. My answer is yes, he would have still sued them. Now I'm going to ask it to you. If Denims had done the exact same infringing reactions, and these other people, exact same infringing reactions, but had just said like Ethan instead of saying I want to take money away from him, and you didn't have all that stuff about the snark, that is to say, he set a trap, right? And let's imagine that there was no Reddit post. It's just as infringing of reactions, but you don't have the admissions. Do you think he would have gone after them?
I don't know. Maybe I would have, but I don't know.
He would have. What he was doing was he was setting a trap. He couldn't have known in advance that they were going to make admissions, Tom. So when he was planning this all out, it wasn't with the notion that we were going to have these, damning admissions. He was trying to set a trap because of the infringement, and for you to buy that. Oh, like I'll give you the final example. Let's say Hasan never made the admission, but he did just such a blatantly infringing content. But he never made the admission. He never said, don't go to Ethan's channel. But he did the kind of infringing thing. Do you think he would sue Hasan, yes or no?
Not after he told him to react to it 20 times, no.
Really?
Yes, that is him giving him permission. He is telling him, I want you to react to this on stream. Yes, he said it numerous times. There's no way you can sue somebody after telling them you want them to watch your stuff on stream. They're like, no shot.
Well, then I'll ask you, because you said the implied consent in the context of that. Do you think that that's implied consent for other people to do it? You're saying, Hasan, watch this.
Legally,
I want you to watch this.
When I said implied consent, I said culturally, like YouTube culture, but I'm not saying legally there's implied consent. No, not at all.
So what do you think about this?
But I think in that case, that is consent. I would say that that's explicit consent. Yes, I want you to watch this on your stream 20 times over and over. Just watch it already, bro. Just watch it already. Just review it already. Yes, I would say that is explicit consent, not implied.
Okay. He also said that he was setting a trap for these people. Who do you think he was setting a trap for?
I think that was also post hoc. Like I think that he was just trying to dramatize it. If I was because I don't. What I don't know is if he actually consistently.
Wait, is he lying about that then?
I don't know. Again, that's just my thought process. As soon as I watch him saying all this shit, I'm like, no shot. In order
to believe this is why Tom, I think, is saying this now, because Tom, I think you're recognizing the problem. In order to believe that this
I said this when I reviewed it.
Okay, but in order to think that this is explicit consent for Hasan, you have to think that, okay, Ethan was giving explicit consent to Hasan, but he was always also trying to trap the non-Hasan people. And I'm just like, what? Wait, so this was this Machiavellian strategy to give explicit consent to Hasan, but also to do a trap and he says it, right? Like, I wanted to make something so good that they would react to it. And so do you think it's plausible that he was giving explicit consent to Hasan, but still trying to trap the other people into making admissions? Does that even pass the smell test?
And this is one of the things that I said is that if he was actually doing this, and this is part of his plan, he would have come out with this when Denims announced a lawsuit against him. He would have said, oh, really? Well, I have a lawsuit against you too, but he didn't. And then now a week or two later, after she closes her lawsuit and says, never mind, then he comes out with this. I think he wanted to just sue her because she was suing him.
You don't think he was trying to sue Hasan? You didn't think he had a plan to sue Hasan? Because he knew.
Yeah, no.
Really?
Again, especially not. I don't think he had a plan to sue any of them, but it just the way that all this happened, it seems weird. And again, he gave explicit consent.
So
yeah, probably.
You think he's probably lying about? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like Ethan.
That's my problem then. Kind of weasel, my problem is if he's lying about stuff, I just don't. And I think he's lying about the savior rationale. I think he's being or at least disingenuous. I don't think that. So even in your version, Tom, you think that Ethan is lying about setting a trap?
Yeah, sure. So let me explain my thought process is there's a bunch of people that that I would love to sue. They're just a bunch of pieces of shit. If I could find something to sue them on, or if I had like the resources or whatever, I would do it. But there's like a line there where I need them to actually like cross that line in order for me to feel as though I would actually be vindicated in doing so. Whereas I could find any little thing to do it, but I would need them to actually do something that's above and beyond in order to do it, right?
Isn't the more plausible scenario that he was planning to sue this entire time, and that's why he registered the copyright, because he knew doing so gives this the remedy in court and the statutory damages? Like he was pre-registering because he intended to sue. And so I don't know why you would say you think he's lying about that. I think he was telling the truth. But the problem is,
maybe
that stated
that's
rationale.
what I'm saying. I don't know if he does this regularly.
Does what regularly? He does what regularly?
Pre-registers his content, because if I was his size, I would. If I was his size, I would.
Really? You would pre-register every stream and every video you drop if you were that size? That is not common practice.
And in the past, when he talked about it, he said that like a while ago, he said, I'm opening up my IP in my copyright, and that like I've talked to my lawyers, like we're allowing people to use IP to a certain extent. He drew some lines around it, but he said like to a certain extent. And so it sounded to me like he was copywriting everything back then, but maybe not.
I wasn't aware of this. So he made statements saying he's, quote, opening up his IP.
Mm-hmm.
I might need to revisit those statements then.
So he has changed it numerous times since. So he said it a while ago, a couple of years ago, then later said, okay, we do have to start like changing this a little bit. And now he's like, because one of the problems is we're starting to make things members only, and people are stealing the members only content and then putting it up. And this is becoming a problem because then nobody has an incentive to be a member anymore. And so then he changed it again later, saying, hey, there's channels that are uploading a lot of our content. It is like fair use as long as you're like trying or something. We're not going to take you down or anything.
I will take
but if you're just re-uploading full VODs, so yeah.
I will take a look at those statements. That might make things more interesting. And from the license front, I'll take a look at those statements, what kind of caveats he puts in. You know, if you're opening up your IP, you know, you better be careful about how you phrase it. That's all I'll say, because I was yelling at Lycan before. A lot of the case law he was pointing to had to do with like open licenses and stuff like that. I'm gonna need to take a second look at that case law given those statements, and I might have to look at those statements. So I'm just saying, I didn't know that he potentially opened himself up to that argument by, quote, opening up IP. I'm going to revisit those statements actually a little bit more carefully, but I'm glad that we can agree. At least from your perspective, he's lying about one thing. He's lying about the fact that this was planned from the start. I think that's a preposterous. Like, why would you say that he's lying about that this was a plan to sue, when it seems pretty like he says that he was planning to sue. He registered his work. He's trying to at least bait people into watching it, right? And so wouldn't the more plausible lie be, well, this was all to protect the community? That's what I take to be the more plausible lie. And we can just, I think, very plausibly say that what's motivating him is not protecting the community. It's going after his enemies. And that's, again, fine. But then don't sell us.
I think it's more so he doesn't want to
narrative.
do something that would also like implicate himself. He doesn't want to sue somebody because he also does React content. He doesn't want to implicate himself, and so he wants to like at least have like
but H3 does fair use. He does fair use, I would say, and he probably thinks he does fair use.
Right.
Who he doesn't think does fair use, and who he thinks is infringing by his own statements are people like XQC. He says, I could have sued XQC. Why? Because XQC, by Ethan's lights, does infringing work. And he's before critiqued XQC specifically for being infringing. He's gone after XQC, saying it doesn't matter if you have the best of intentions when you're infringing, right? You brought up the fact that XQC said, well, it doesn't matter because until someone tells me it's not infringement. Ethan, like, very viciously fought against XQC, said, no, you can't just assume that it's benevolent. And it doesn't matter if your intentions are benevolent. It's still an injustice. That's Ethan's position. And so now, all of a sudden, he says, I don't want to chill what I previously critiqued as an injustice. That's what's disingenuous, Tom. The fact that before he was so heavily saying, it doesn't matter if you have benevolent intent, it's still wrong. Against XQC, who said it doesn't, the default should be that it's okay. And now he's saying, oh, I wouldn't want to chill XQC. The reason he's doing that is because he knows suing XQC would be unpopular, but he has to try to have a greater narrative of protecting the commentary community because he doesn't want to be accused of being this kind of person who's like petty. But that's my take on it, and that's what I think is disingenuous. If he just petty, yeah. If he just said this is petty, this is because they're infringing and I don't like them, I wouldn't have a problem. I wouldn't be doing this. But everyone is saying, no, he never said that. He never claimed to be a savior, and he is being a savior, and this is a justifiable line, and he did pre-plan it. It doesn't pass the smell test.
Okay. I did send you just now. I sent you a DM with one of the like amendments that he made to opening up his IP. And so that's just one clip of him like talking about what he's changing. But yeah, there was a lot of back and forth on it where he would say one thing, then amend it, then amend it again, then amend it again. And the amendments did make sense because again, like he was adding like, members only stuff to it, and that like now people are paying for that content. So now it doesn't make sense to allow people to just take it. And
I'm going to have to do some case law research on implied licenses, oral implied licenses, like all that stuff, because I have no idea what the case law is on that and how amendments work and whether it's kind of like a reasonable observer perspective on what, like, because you can't know, right? Like when you open up your license like that and you don't have a written document that encapsulates all the terms and conditions and you just say it out loud, I don't know what standard is applied there. I'm going to need to do research on it. I don't know if you're going to be able to enforce and like assume that people are watching each of your streams to get the different terms and conditions and amendments without posting a written document. And I don't know what the effect of that is on the implied license or license argument. I have no idea about that. I will be doing research. I'll be doing case law research because, hey, who knows? Maybe Denims at all have a greater case than I thought. Maybe I'll have to make a retraction video and I'll have to make an amendment video to my own video to bring up this other argument and say, maybe it's not as open and shut as I thought. Very interesting. And thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, but I do agree. There's no way that he could have said, I went ahead and filed this copyright ahead of time, and also I'm only doing it because of this line, and I didn't want them to, break my copyright. So, well, it sounds like you're saying you did want them to, and that you set the trap. So that does like imply that you wanted them to do this. So yeah, there's a lot of like contradicting statements in there that I feel like you got to pick one side or the other or somewhere in the middle.
I think that's right, Tom. I think that part of this narrative that Ethan is portraying makes no sense whatsoever. That some of it has to go. Either this wasn't pre-planned or he was, and he's very granularly like looking at this nuance between intentional siphoning and non-intentional siphoning, even though that nuance never mattered to him in the past. Before, he was gun-ho against XQC trying to say that distinction mattered. That's the key thing here, right? Like before, when XQC was saying, but I'm not intentionally trying to steal people, I'm trying to help them, it was Ethan who said it didn't matter. But now it matters. Now, of course, it matters because we have those admissions, and we have to think, well, did he plan those admissions to happen? Did he really think that it was going to happen? And was he really like, oh, yes, when this is all a big, massive strategy to help the community? Or is this a post hoc rationale that he's developed? And I think it's a post hoc rationale to not upset the apple cart, to not get the juicers against him, to not get the Asmongolders against him, and to try to get as neat a coalition as possible to go after people that everyone hates on the internet. All these lefties that say dumb shit, and that's what he wants to do. And it's about alliances, and it's about crafting this like thing that's not actually motivating him. And it's all about just getting friends on your side. And that's why I resent even more when an independent thinker sees through that bullshit and calls it out. All of a sudden the friends come in and say, oh, you're just trying to cozy up to Hasan. Oh, you're this and that. Absurd. And I'm glad you came on here and you're acknowledging something about this story doesn't make sense.
Well, I mean, you did believe the Hasan airport story, and even after it looked like he admitted that he got an email a while before saying,
oh, you want to do that now? Let's do that now. You want to do that now? All right, let's do a pause. Well, when we make this, and by the way, I'm so pissed off that the internet stopped working like partway and like split up the VOD. Tom, how are you doing, by the way? Can we just take a little break before we get into the Hasan thing?
Yeah, doing well. Trying to. I saw Khalil got out. I know you were one of the other people who was covering that pretty heavily as well. So yeah, that's.
Did you see Aristocracy's tweet at me, dude?
Bro, I saw the one. Hold on, I saw the one where she kept talking about like why are you downing this lawyer's capabilities? And I'm like, bro, Eris, you didn't read the complaint, dude. If you just read the complaint, you would know. There's a meme, dude.
There's like typos on every page. I don't know if it's on every page, but there's typos all over the place. And again, I was never saying, I kind of took as a granted, maybe even too quickly, because you're here telling me that the analysis that, at least on the content nuke, that it was fair use, that you actually think for the content nuke it's fair use. You said that, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, if you go watch it, like it's 4 hours long, dude. It is a lot.
You know what? I'm gonna watch all of Denim's reaction, and I'm going to update and see if I think that the content. Now maybe the other part isn't where it's the whatever interview or whatever. Maybe that part is very clearly infringement. And that's the part I think that was being highlighted in the video where she was like stepping away and stuff. And so maybe I'll have to take a look at the actual content new reaction and maybe update my opinion about whether that constitutes fair use. If what you're telling me is,
because yeah, I don't think he's going to be able to get Denims very well, because these are two separate things. Like he's using a statement that went towards the content nuke where she like says that she has intent to replace him in the market, but then it's like it's the fucking video where she doesn't qualify for fair use. So even this is the problem, is that even if you and this is what I have to keep like explaining over and over, is that if I have like a 10-minute video and I take like 3 fucking hours to review this 10-minute video, it doesn't matter if I get to the end of it and I'm like, I'm definitely replacing these people in the market. Everybody's going to come watch my video instead of theirs. It doesn't matter that I said I intend to do a thing that I didn't actually do.
No, 100%. Yeah, no. So what? Because of course, intent is not an element here. It's not. It's really not. And so I'm going to admit something that I was wrong. And I really mean this. This is not ironic. I was wrong to make an assessment of fair use for the content nuke without watching that video. Lycan called me on it, and he was right about that. I'm going to have to rewatch that entire video of Denims to come to a reassessment about whether I think that video is fair use. I think that it's important for me to watch that, and I will give you guys a reassessment after having watched that content. I took Ethan at his word, but of course, just like Hasan always lies, if you admit that Ethan is lying now about what he planned to do, we should question and, trust but verify that this actually isn't fair use. And we should compare that actually to what XQC did and really take a look at this. So I'm going to watch all of that video to reassess whether it's fair use. I think the interview one as well, I'm going to watch. It's likely, I think, that there's probably some infringement somewhere, but I just think that it was wrong of me to make that assessment without watching the video first. I think that was wrong, and I completely apologize for doing that. And thank you for bringing that to my attention. You said that it's fair use, and so I'm going to take another look at it. I'm going to do another. Also, you brought to my attention this open license thing where he apparently claimed to open up his IP, maybe with some conditions. And now Lycan's research that he was providing me seems to be perhaps a little bit more relevant. And so I'm going to take a look at the case law on implied licenses for copyright, what they entail, if they're oral, if they're not written down anywhere. And so I think that everyone who's reacted has inspired me to really, with a magnifying glass, take a closer look at these claims here, because there's something fishy here.
Yeah, but yeah, if you watch like I said, I posted like a short video that just kind of like shows what like his video is talking about, and then the statement is applied to something different, and you can't say her intent is for this, but they're going to apply it to the other thing. So yeah, it's
that said, I do want to say one thing.
Weird.
My critiques still go through, in my opinion. My critique of the complaint being unhinged goes through, and my critique about the disingenuousness of this protection rationale goes through. And so those I take to be completely still my positions, absolutely yes. And so I will be taking a second look at the underlying fair use and infringement issues, because we need to get to the bottom of this. And I'm so grateful that the reaction has been so strong, because it's actually encouraged me to take a look at my own biases. And I think this is very positive. And really, I want to thank you, Tom.
But you also know, I think it's like important to mention, like it especially legally, this is a norm where like when you first file your first complaint, you're throwing shit at the wall a lot of times. Like it's not always like, this is exactly what we think exactly happened and we're going to get all of this right now. Like a lot of it's throwing shit at the wall, just trying to see how much you can get through to the actual jury trial.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, but that doesn't justify
His
like
video.
the kind of rhetoric at issue there. Well, the video, yeah, but the rhetoric here where it's like the alt left's Kellyanne Conway talking about Hasan being the Grand Mufti, the pictures of Hitler, the constant typos, the not blue booking citations that look like shit, the multiple levels of paragraphs that are like 4 or 5 levels beneath on a complaint, the memorandum of law on fair use in the middle of a pleading, which I don't take to be appropriate. The fact that it's 80 pages long on a simple infringement case. All of this to me indicates it's it's not good legal advocacy, and I don't even think it works as
could
good
have
as
been
HR.
5 pages at most.
Yeah,
it's kind of insane.
But we'll take we'll have. I'll just say, well, I'm going to have to reassess some of the underlying infringement stuff as it relates to the Denims thing, and you know what? I'm going to have to take a look at all these videos. We need to get to the bottom of it, and thank you, Tom, for that. All right, let's take another quick. Okay, the Hasan thing, the detainment issue. I know my chat and my observers, everyone is so waiting in the wings for me to argue this again, but what do you take to be the issue with my position and what's going on?
So I don't think that it's safe to say that they did infringe upon Hasan. And I think that the fact that there is always like one of the reasons that the CBP says that they will stop and do random searches like this at the airport is because they is for random stops. Even like there sometimes they don't even have a reason and they are just going to randomly stop people regularly. That even this makes it to where we just have no idea why he was stopped. And then we can get to this afterwards, but I would also say that even his conduct online might be enough to where he would just be considered some sort of threat, and they wouldn't give him this privilege to for what is it called, expedited pass.
So I'm gonna break this up structurally so we understand what we're talking about in every given instance. So first is like a factual question: what was the basis of the revocation of global entry, which happened in March? What was the basis of the stop? And what was the basis of the line of questioning? These are factual questions. What is the most likely factual thing? And then there's the question of what's permissible, the ought of it. If this was the basis of the revocation, if that were the basis of the stop, if the other were the basis of the line of questioning, would we find that acceptable? So why don't we deal first with what we think happened.
Line of questioning, basis of stop, basis of
revocation.
Revocation.
Right. Yep. So let's first talk about factually. They granted him his global entry status, full global entry status, not conditional, in February 2025. They revoked it less than a month later. If it was random that they did that, I would agree, no problem. What are the odds that you think that the revocation that occurred in March was random? Less than a month later.
I don't think the revocation
was random. Okay.
Yeah, unlikely that it's random. Yeah.
So do you think that it's likely, then I'll ask, that viewpoint discrimination played a role in the revocation of global entry in March 2025?
I think it could, and I think that I might even find it like justifiable. Yeah.
Okay. Before we ask whether it's justified, let's ask whether or not it is that. Do you think it's more likely than not that viewpoint discrimination played a role in the revocation in March?
I have no evidence to believe one thing or the other.
Really? So let me provide you some evidence, okay?
Really?
So the first piece of evidence. When he's ultimately detained, now this is after the revocation, okay? But after acquired evidence can be informative for things that happened before, correct? Right? So like if I stash a weapon 2 weeks after someone was murdered and they find the weapon, even though they acquired that evidence afterwards, it can inform what happened before. Fair? I'm just trying to head off any notion that, well, because I'm pointing to evidence
like
after
you can't use ad hoc.
Well,
yeah, you can't use ad hoc.
No, but I can use evidence that acquired. So let's say, for example, let's say that Trump in January 6th, he didn't order the National Guard at a given time. And then 2 months later, he admits that I wanted to overturn the country. I'm not saying that's what happened, but you would say, well, just
You're
because
saying you can update your opinion with
based
new
on things
information.
that happens after, right? Based on
Yes.
for the thing that happened before. So I think a
Yes.
strong piece of evidence that the revocation was viewpoint discrimination are the questions that were asked of Hasan in May that related in substance to the Houthis, to his comments to about Rick Scott, to his opinions about Trump, that these questions of a type related to the Houthis, related to Hamas, related to Israel, related to Palestine, related to Trump, that is evidence that supports that the fact that the revocation itself related to stuff of that topic. Okay? That's I think strong evidence.
You're saying the fact that the guy who questioned him at the airport, the fact that he asked questions about those things means that it's more likely that that had something to do with the revocation.
Correct. I think that's very strong evidence.
So the reason I don't think it is because when I listened to Hasan talk about this, everything that he said, that he's like every response that he gave to them, the response that they gave back sounded like a normal response. And the fact that he said he was trying to like give them a lot of information, see how much he could get away with, it sounded like he was giving them information that they were then responding to and asking about. And that this all had to do with just the interview in and of itself.
Do you think that Hasan like brought up his comments about Rick Scott?
I don't remember him saying anything about the Rick Scott thing.
He doesn't allege that he brought up Trump. He doesn't allege that he brought up the war. So no,
I don't remember him saying that they brought it up, but so this is part of my problem though, is that in the very first time he talked about this, he never said that they asked him about his loyalty to Trump. He didn't mention it. Then he went to a college campus, I think in Chicago, and talked about this again. Never mentioned that they asked him about his loyalty to Trump. Then I think he went on CBS or MSNBC, and then the first thing that he says is that they asked him about his loyalty to Trump. The later things that he said seemed to get more and more extreme and more like wild, to where if those things had happened, I would have been kind of like blown away at the first time.
In his very first video where he details what occurred, he talks about the chronology of the questions. But even just put aside the precise form of the questions, they're inquiring and probing into these types of matters. Rick Scott comments, Hamas Houthis, Trump support for war. That to me is strong evidence that the revocation related to those things, and that the stop itself wasn't just random. Let's deal with the revocation first. But that the fact that he is being asked those questions, I think, lends evidence for the underlying revocation. That is to say, there's probably a mark on his revocation that would lead a CBP officer to see that revocation. He's in the global entry line. And to see the basis of that revocation and to ask questions about the basis of that revocation. And that is what I take to be very strong evidence, is that the topics being probed about relate to those views in the questioning.
So he also mentioned that at one point they pull out he pulls out his phone and starts like Googling him and is bringing up stuff on like Reddit forums and stuff like that. Would we not think that that would be part of that? Is that he's just looking him up and looking at things that are being said online?
Yeah, I mean, so that would be even greater evidence. I would take that the fact that they're in real time, like searching his opinions to ask about them and inquire about them, that would be self-standing, independent evidence, unrelated to the revocation, that they're inquiring about his beliefs and they're treating him more negatively on the basis of those beliefs, and that they're using this opportunity where they don't need a warrant and where they've seized him to ask him these questions. So, but like that's one piece of evidence, is the questions they asked at detainment, the nature of the questions.
But if they looked it up at the time, that wouldn't be evidence that they already had these questions planned because of the revocation reason.
Right. So at the time of Hasan's revocation, they haven't asked these questions. Is that what you're saying? That's what I was getting at in terms of.
No, I'm saying, I'm saying that at the time when he was pulled out of line for global entry and he was asked, he did the interview, that in that moment, he says that they are Googling him and pulling up information on him on Twitter and Reddit and stuff and asking him about those things. So that to me says
That would
they
be
didn't
viewpoint
already have these questions planned. They weren't already like discriminating against him when they took away the global entry for these reasons. This says they're just replying to the things that he's telling them. He says, hey, I'm a big name. I do Twitch and I do political commentary, and they're looking him up and trying to see if there's anything on there, and then asking him about the things that come up at the top, and that has nothing to do with why they revocated his stuff a month earlier.
So if you buy that, now it's consistent with the revocation rationale here, that they could be looking up different stuff, other comments but that the revocation rationale, there's nothing inconsistent about having it apply to the rationale and also look up new stuff on your phone. There's nothing inconsistent about those rationales, just to be clear. But even just standing by itself independently, if they're looking stuff up on their social media and asking him questions related to his beliefs, if you believe that, then why isn't that a self-standing basis to think that he's being discriminated on the basis of his views? They're going through his views and statements and asking him questions about the Houthis. What would be the purpose of those questions if not viewpoint discrimination?
Wait, okay, hold on.
Yeah.
The reason, so we might have to go to the last thing, because I think whether or not it's justified is like the important part, because if you think it is justified for them to ask those questions, I think it's justified. You just don't like it.
Yeah, no, so I'm asking what's the most likely
we don't have much of a conversation to have here then.
So do you agree that the most likely outcome for the questioning, either on the basis of them just independently looking, or I want to get to other evidence for the revocation. But you do believe at some point that Hasan's views influenced the nature of the questioning or the stop? That it's more likely than not that at least some part of this is influenced by Hasan's disposition.
Yeah, things he said, things he's done that would signal some sort of ideological alignment. Yeah.
So we agree that most likely his viewpoints did contribute to at least some of what's going on here. I want to just finish up real quick on why I think the revocation is also viewpoint based. So one is the questions that they asked at the stop. Another huge one is what was happening at the time. Okay. So there's two time intervals that matter, or two time issues that matter. First, it's the short window of time. It's from when he was granted in February to March. The fact that it was granted and then so quickly revoked would indicate some reason, right? Something beyond, he was just checked, right? He was just checked for all the normal reasons, for all the background reasons. And so something must have got to their attention for them to reach, because this is not a common practice for you to have your global entry revoked so quickly after it's granted. That's not very common at all. And this is before he's even left the country. And so it's nothing that he's done abroad that's influenced this revocation. And so something must have triggered them to either relook and do it again. So that's one time interval that matters, is the fact that it was done so quickly after it was granted indicates to me a much lower likelihood of some normal rationale unconnected to his viewpoints, his prominent viewpoints, in that interim, that less than a month interim, that would cause a revocation. So that time window matters to me. If it were something like he spelled his name wrong, I would expect it on the first application to be rejected or something. If it was something that he presents some other risk unconnected to his viewpoints, I would expect it on the first. I don't think that something happened in that interim, separate and apart from his stated commentary. If it's something he did abroad coming back in, where he lied at the border, or he brought in a banana when he wasn't supposed to bring in a banana, he lied about how much he was importing. Well, he wasn't out of the country in that interim. And so the fact that it was so closely granted and then taken away lowers the likelihood that it's some non-viewpoint based reason that was the revocation. And the other time window you have to consider is it was revoked in March, right at the same time that the Trump administration is unleashing all of these other viewpoint discriminatory frameworks in the context of immigration, both for citizens and non-citizens. In the context of non-citizens, green cards are being revoked for people like Mahmoud Khalil, even for obscure viewpoints, right? Like Rumeysa Ozturk, who wrote an op-ed. No one knows who the fuck that is. She had her student visa revoked and she was arrested right around this same time in March, where they're implementing this framework at the border and in the interior of the country, checking everyone's social media. And so the timing lines up there. And they're also revoking global entry of this guy, Chris Krebs, who was an enemy of the administration because he had said the election wasn't stolen. And so they're deploying this revocation of global entry to their other political enemies on the basis of their political viewpoints. And so That, combined with the short window of acceptance to revocation and the questions asked at the border, I think strongly lends to the notion that Hasan's stated views had an effect on the revocation. Do you agree that's the most likely outcome?
Again, I don't know about the most likely, but I think that it is likely
more than 50%.
Something that I would think is. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we
sure.
agree on that. We agree on that. The question is,
reason
is it
that I
justified?
have some problems with it, and I just want to state, because everybody else that I've heard talk about going through the global entry line and having to deal with these sorts of interviews, they all said that it went exactly the same. They were asked similar types of questions, and that they just kind of followed the line of like answers that they gave. They would ask about the answer, then they'd ask about that answer, and then just kind of go down a line over and over and over. Based on the answers that they gave. And so that's why like everything that he went through there just didn't sound out of the ordinary. Obviously the revocation afterwards makes it sound a little bit different, but
the revocation before.
Him telling us about the revocation later. Yes,
that's because he didn't check his email. I want to deal with the cope real quick. There's a cope from, and I know you're not saying it, but there are people who say, for example, if the fact that it was revoked in March and he was stopped at global entry, it shows that the reason isn't viewpoint discrimination. It's that it was revoked and he just didn't check his email. But what I would argue is it doesn't really matter. If the revocation is based on viewpoint discrimination, then the stop, which is based on the revocation, which itself is based on viewpoint discrimination, would be based on viewpoint discrimination, since the act of violating what I take to be the First Amendment, now we'll talk about that in a second, it's turtles all the way down. It would infect the propriety of the stop itself, which is based on a revocation, which itself is viewpoint discrimination. Okay, but all we're talking about now is factually, and we agree, more likely than not, greater than 50%, that it had some influence on the revocation and even some influence on the questioning. The question is it justified? And my position is it is not justified under the First Amendment. That viewpoint discrimination is anathema, and that in order to justify viewpoint discrimination, you need to pass strict scrutiny. That's the highest level test there is under constitutional law. And we wouldn't accept it for global entry. And so I'm curious, take any of the beliefs, support for the Houthis, alleged support for the Houthis, and I think he probably does support the Houthis, alleged support for Hamas, the comments about Rick Scott, position on Trump. Which of those opinions do you think justifies viewpoint discrimination and government discrimination?
All except for his positions on Trump. Even in the CBP details about how they decide whether or not you are eligible for this, they talk about the fact that there's it's all very general, and they even say this is purposely very general and broad, and we cannot give you specific reasons on where we draw lines, but that yes, one of the things is whether or not there is some sort of fear that you could be interacting with a terrorist group, have direct or indirect support for them, there's a lot of things like that to where they're, and I think that the global entry thing isn't something that I would consider some fundamental right that can't be taken away for a First Amendment thing.
Let's deal with that first. I agree. Global entry is not a fundamental right. It's a privilege. Okay? If the government said Democrats aren't allowed to get global entry, would that be a problem under the First Amendment?
If who said it?
If the government said, new rule, Trump administration, global entry, we're revoking global entry for every Democrat.
I think that just because I don't think just because I think they can do it for a First Amendment right doesn't mean I think all First Amendment rights are.
Would it be a First Amendment issue? Would it be
eligible.
A First Amendment issue to say global entry is a privilege? We think Democrats are more likely to do a crime. We could be wrong about that, but this isn't a fundamental right to get global entry, and so all Democrats are banned from global entry. Do you think that would be a First Amendment violation?
I don't know about First Amendment violation, but I would think that it's unfair and unreasonable more so.
Well, I would posit to you that just because I'll give another example then, and then I'll posit to you. Let's say that they say no black people can have global entry; they're more likely to do a crime.
Mm-hmm.
Equal protection issue under the Constitution. Yeah, why? But it's not a privilege. It is a privilege. It's not a right. So why would it matter if they said no black people can get global entry?
I don't even know if it's like an equal protections issue. It just seems like, cruel and unusual. And that is like, it's more so that they're doing something that just does not make sense. Doesn't seem to have any utility to it. Doesn't seem to have a good rationale to it.
You would just disagree. You would just disagree with it on policy grounds. You wouldn't say this is unconstitutional racial discrimination. If the government said, hey, no global entry for black people, you would say, I don't agree with the policy, but it's legally allowed.
Yeah, the problem is that the entire thing, it would have to have some sort of like reasoning to where you are less likely to be able to go through something with less security, be able to go quicker,
they say black
be
people
able to like bypass everybody else.
And you agree with this, right? You agree all else equal, black people are overrepresented in crimes, right? So the government says, listen, this is a privilege. This is for the top people. And global entry is like a very precious thing, and we're not going to give it to black people. They commit more crime.
Yeah, I would disagree with it on the basis on the
policy,
fact that it's irrational and that it's.
You would say I don't agree with the policy, but would you say it's legal for the government to do that?
Again, I don't. I think that like even the Supreme Court would disagree with it based on the fact that it's just not reasonable. That there's no like reasonability there, or that it would be cruel and unusual. That'd be irrational.
This is what the court would say. The court would say that the Equal Protection Clause, as applied to the federal government through the Fifth Amendment, so it's this reverse incorporation because the Equal Protection Clause is part of the 14th Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment is understood to reverse incorporate the Equal Protection Clause, so it applies to the federal government. But the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, by its terms, only applies to states. But what the Supreme Court would say is that a facial racial ban on access to like a privilege, and it is a privilege, 100%, is subject to the heightened amount of scrutiny. And you're not allowed to do this. That because there's no compelling purpose that's narrowly tailored to justify racial discrimination. Think about the following, right? Like entrance into
compelling purpose, I think, is the important part.
So think about Harvard, right? Harvard. So Harvard gets federal dollars, right? Or whatever. So consider it a government entity for the limited purpose of doing this analysis. Even though, it's not a right to get into Harvard, right? It's not a right to get into Harvard. But if Harvard said white people need not apply, Jews need not apply, notwithstanding the fact that getting into Harvard is not a right, it's still an issue, right? It's still an equal protection issue. So you don't get out of it just because it's a privilege. You agree, right? You can't do racial discrimination in that way for college admissions anymore. And even before it was, the argument was that diversity was a compelling purpose. And now we're done with that. And so now it's like, you can't favor one race versus the other. So just because entrance to a particular university is not a right, it's a privilege that you have to earn, doesn't mean the government can discriminate on the basis of something that's not allowed. And put aside whether you agree or disagree with the policy, it's unconstitutional to do it. It's unconstitutional to say to this public university, black people need not apply because their scores are so much lower on average and because they're more likely to do crime. And you might disagree with the policy, but you should also disagree with the fact that it's illegal, okay? You feel me?
So do you disagree with red flag laws?
I don't really have much of a... I have some background in some gun laws. I haven't done the analysis for red flag laws, but in general...
I don't have background in any laws.
Yeah, so in general, no. In general, I don't have a problem with red flag laws. Based on my limited
the reason I
understanding
ask is because a lot of what you're talking about almost sounds similar to red flag laws and the way that they would discriminate on somebody's ability to own a gun without them ever breaking a law, without them ever violating something, but purely based on like something that they said normally, and whether or not this is reasonable is normally what we're worried about. We would allow this thing to be somewhat anti-First Amendment because it is reasonable and has utility.
So it's a separate topic, but I'll address it. In the context of the Second Amendment, okay, there are some things that are just not protected by the Second Amendment, all right? They're not in scope of the Second Amendment. For example, coffee is not in scope for the Second Amendment, right? You're not dealing with arms. You're not dealing with guns or with arms that are protected by the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment also has this test from a recent case called Bruin, which looks to historical analogs for laws and basically says that certain laws, to the extent that they map onto some historical analog, don't violate the Second Amendment, right? So for example, laws that limit access for felons to have guns have been upheld, or at least in dicta say they're upheld by the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment just doesn't protect it, right? The First Amendment doesn't protect child pornography. First Amendment doesn't protect defamation. First Amendment doesn't protect, incitement, doesn't protect fighting words. So to look at the red flag laws, there's analysis about like whether the right is even
But
implicated
it's not,
at all.
just to be clear, those things, it's not because of like a speech issue, but more so because of a outcome because of it. It is because of like the reasonability and utility to this is different. Once you say something, there is an action that follows instead of it just being words that come out. It is the direct cause that comes from it when it comes to like things like defamation, things like, yelling fire in a crowded
They're just
theater.
categorically not protected because of a history and tradition in that respect. And for gun laws, it's actually less of a look at the effects of it, and it's a look at history, right? Like right now, the mode of the court's analysis, especially when it comes to gun control, has been to look for historical analogs. Okay, and so there are categories of unprotected conduct or regulations that don't infringe on either of the amendments, right? And yeah, we can have so the red flag laws, at least some of them have been upheld in a recent case. I forget the actual name of the case, but some of them have been upheld as acceptable and as having some basis and being protectable, right? And so there's a carve
Sure, but
out.
if you're going to appeal to the Supreme Court, why wouldn't you appeal to the Supreme Court on whether or not they're allowed to discriminate
I am,
through
yeah.
CBP?
So I am. I think that there is that viewpoint discrimination is subject to the heightened amount of scrutiny, just like racial discrimination. Now, you can sometimes racially discriminate, okay? If the government was going to put on a play called Obama the Play, the government could put out flyers and say, we're looking for an African-American male to play the lead. If, for example, there were some virus, right, that only targeted black people, and it was this horrible, like, COVID times a trillion, maybe the government could even say, okay, different regulations if you're black because of this compelling purpose, this virus, right? So, but it's a very, very strict test. That's what I'm talking about here. When I'm giving you the example of a per se ban on black people having global entry, you can think of some factual circumstances that would survive the constitutional test in that instance. But in general, in the large amount of cases, it's not going to survive constitutional muster. And so I'll give you an example, right? If the government said, no Jews can get global entry, okay, it almost certainly would fail, right? That's violating free expression. It's making free exercise of your religion. It's making a category and discriminate on the basis of a fundamental right, which is the right to practice your religion. Notwithstanding the fact that global entry is a privilege, the government would still be barred unless they could show that, I don't know, that Jews have this, there's some compelling purpose. I don't even know what it would be. In the factual context would need to be so extreme, so severe to justify that. And viewpoint discrimination is like that. Viewpoint discrimination is like these kinds of really, really high thresholds and bars to meet for the government. So I'll ask you.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying is that when you're talking about this, all of the examples that you're giving are going to be based on like reasonability and the utility afterwards, whether or not there's some great harm that comes afterwards. But when you're talking about discriminating against all black people because they have a higher crime rate, it is irrational. It is fallacious because you're talking about 6% of black people who are actually committing these violent crimes and then applying it to 100% of these people. This does not directly correlate from one to one. But when we're talking about ideology, beliefs, like things that you advocate for, these are direct one-to-one things that we can look at and say this makes somebody more dangerous.
So a question for you. Is there empirically more evidence for the notion that black people disproportionately commit more crime versus people with Hasan's viewpoints commit more crime? Which of those is there more empirical evidence for?
I don't think either one would matter because it's going to be individualistic.
Okay, so,
and we know that it would be the other way around, that which is more likely, that we meet a black person and they commit a crime, or is it somebody who's going to be in favor of if somebody's in favor of terroristic activity or terrorists or things like that, are they more likely to be dangerous in some sense or have some sort of
what's the empirical evidence? What's that empirical evidence that someone with an American citizen with Hasan's viewpoints presents more of a risk? What's the empirical
Again,
evidence
but
for
it's
that?
causal. We're talking about causal. The people who support, like people who engage in terrorism, it is causal that their ideology causes them to engage in terroristic activities. Somebody who engages in crime, it is not causal that their black skin caused them to commit crimes. These are separate things. Ideology is causal. Skin color is not. You can't discriminate based on things that's not causal.
So I'm not convinced. I think ideology probably motivates some people, and I'm not a racial. What is this? A racial essentialist or a racial someone who thinks that race is this destiny or anything like that. But I don't know why that matters, right? Like, why does it matter that it's causative as opposed to correlative? Like, if we knew for certain that 99.9999% of Christians, let's say, or a certain, let's say, subset of Christians, that 99.999% of them were prone to terroristic violence, would it matter that it's not causative, that it's just correlative? No, right? You would say the government is justified. It would meet that threshold, right, of compelling purpose. It's narrowly tailored to this subset of Christians, and they have a high propensity on the core based on the correlation, regardless of the causative. And so I don't understand why the causative nature of it matters to your analysis here.
Because I think in both cases, when we're talking about somebody who just agrees, like leftists who just agree with terrorists and black people who commit crimes, I think both of these are going to be very low propensities.
Right.
And that instead we would have to be looking at whether it is correlative or causal. And I would say in the case of the ideology, that is causal.
Wait,
Skin color is
but you
not.
just said Hasan's ideology, people who have Hasan's ideology are probably much less prone to do this kind of shit in general compared to overall, it's a low propensity, people with those ideologies, to do crime, right? People who share that ideology.
Yeah, to do crime, sure.
Yeah. Or to be a threat. So I agree with you on that. And just like overall, right, you can't make that assumption about black people just based on a stereotype because the empirical evidence isn't there with respect to out of the total amount of black people, it's a minority that do crime. You know, it's a small minority of the overall amount of black people and the people who have Hasan's view. So I actually don't understand what the empirical evidence is here for the risk. But even just put that aside, I want to drill down on one thing. The fact that this is a privilege versus a right, that's not going to change large amounts of our analysis, right? If this is viewpoint discrimination,
it does to an extent, yeah.
Why?
I think if they said that you can't fly on airplanes anymore, I would say that this is something that probably it might be a right to some extent, but I'd still think that this would be a huge violation if they said because of this reason you're not allowed to fly on planes anymore.
But flying is
whether
a
or
privilege.
not you get to skip everybody else in the line, that's very different.
But flying is not a right. Flying's a privilege, right?
I think that being able to leave the country and having freedom of association, freedom of movement,
is flying a right or a privilege?
Well, in order to have the freedom to go where you want to, you would have to be able to fly. Those two kind of are the same. I guess maybe you could take a boat.
Is driving a right or a privilege?
It is a right and a privilege, I guess.
No, it can't be both a right and privilege, right? Isn't the fact that something's a privilege is like to show that it's not a right? Like something can't be both a privilege and a right, right?
Well, I guess I'll change my answer. It is a privilege. These are
right.
private businesses. They're they can.
So driving is a privilege, and right. If the government said, for example, Hasan, because of his views on Hamas and the Houthis, and because oftentimes support for Hamas and Houthis is causative, let's say, of doing this kind of terroristic violence and doing these massive car attacks in the middle of cities, Hasan, you're not going to be able to get a license because it's causative, and driving's a privilege. It's not a right. And so because you said this about the Houthis and Hamas, you don't get access to a driver's license. Would you say that's acceptable legally?
No.
But why? It's a privilege, and it would be causative. Ideology does cause certain terrorists to drive cars into large amounts of people.
Because again, I do think that this is different when he has to pay a lot of money for this to again be able to skip everybody. We're not talking about that would be more analogous to him not being.
It's not a lot of money. It's less than the ticket. I'm sure that it's like $100-something plus bucks. It's not a lot of money. I just did it.
Wait, $100+ bucks?
It's
how often?
It's I think you renew it every 5 years. Hang on. Global entry cost.
I thought that you were paying like a monthly or yearly
No.
fine or something.
120 non-refundable fee. That's it.
That's it. Every 5 years.
I think you renew it every. How often do you renew? How often renew global entry? Every 5 years.
Okay. Weird.
So let's talk about that. So
yeah, I guess it's only something that only people who fly very often are going to use. So
you could use it for one trip if you really. Now it's kind of a hassle to do it because you have to do an interview and shit.
I'm saying it's not. Yeah, nobody's going to pay $150.
It's certainly not this like inaccessible thing only for rich people. Plenty of middle class and even lower middle class people have global entry.
Okay.
So, but even just put that aside, right? Like global entry on all fours, like why would you treat that differently than driver's license, right? In driver's license, it's 1-to-1, right? You have a group of people who ideologically, it might cause certain people with certain viewpoints to drive their car through a bunch of innocent people and kill dozens of people. It's happened before in this country. It's happened in Europe. Muslim terrorists, Islamic terrorists doing those kinds of actions. But why aren't you willing to say Hasan, on the basis of his support for the Houthis or Hamas, should not be able to get a license, or that it wouldn't be legally a problem for a state to deny it of him?
Well, I mean, for the same reason that we have heightened security for every time people get on planes versus every time they get into a car. Like, these are very individualistic things. They're like, it's way more common that people are using cars versus using global entry. And then the fact that like what do you mean? Why does it matter that these are
the amount of people?
Police every single time people get in a fucking car. You can't police every time, but you can police whether or not they get a license. But if
they're different, if fundamentally the license is different than the plane, then why, and just the amount of people, then why isn't racial discrimination okay for global entry? Why isn't Democrat discrimination okay for global entry?
We just covered this. Why are we going back?
No. You said fundamentally a driver's license and a global entry is a different thing based on like the amount of people who do global entry versus the amount of people who do driver's license. If that's the case for this example and why it's not 1-to-1, why doesn't racial discrimination in the global entry context, why isn't that okay if these are just fundamentally different and you're able to do way more things with global entry? Why aren't you able to do racial discrimination? Why aren't you able to do Democrat discrimination when it comes to global entry?
I'm not okay. We'll stick to the car example because for the car example, yes. I don't think that people are able to. I don't think it would even be realistic to like have these on like case by case basis. Again, like this is like very individualistic. Like and you wouldn't stop them from getting a license either.
Yeah, no. Imagine someone said Hasan. This only applies to Hasan. Hasan is such a terrorist supporter, such a Hamas supporter. We're gonna deny him a license. Okay.
Yeah. No.
No, right?
As I said, like the fact that they're starting off with like there's already much more heightened like security when it comes to planes because
you're not
now other people are getting into these planes.
I thought you wanted to stay to the driver's license.
What do you
example.
mean I'm not?
Yeah. So would you be okay with the state saying this is specific to Hasan? Hasan has such horrible views, so much support for Hamas. We're not going to let him get a driver's license. He's going to crash it into a bunch of people.
Yeah. I don't think that makes sense. The thing that they're not just afraid that when you come into the country that you're going to do something dangerous, right? They're still allowing you into the country. So they're not like stopping you from coming in. And they're more so like afraid that you can bring things in. I think from my understanding from reading about it is that even more so it is about
they're not stopping you from walking everywhere. They even say, listen, Hasan, you can get a motorcycle license. You can get a moped. You can drive. So there are other ways you can go on the bus. You can go on the train. You just can't do the car.
Yeah, no, I don't.
No, why not?
I don't think these things are analogous.
Why?
Because because again, I think that like flying in a plane is a very different thing. You're going out of the country.
If it's a very different thing, why doesn't it justify racial discrimination? They say this is very
because
different.
racial discrimination
I'll give you an example. So,
fallacious. We've already been over this.
Okay, but isn't
because it's fallacious? It's not reasonable. There's no utility to it. It doesn't make sense.
But you agree that it's on all fours with the viewpoint. Like someone with Hasan's viewpoint is very unlikely to do crime, just like a black person in the main is very unlikely to do crime.
Yes, but I think the one is causal and the other one's not. This is what I said before.
The causalness of it. So the fact that it's causal, the ideology, that to you is a difference.
Yes.
But it's not a difference with respect to the driver's license? If it's causal in one, and why is it a difference in the driver's license context? The truth is, you're uncomfortable with the driver's license thing because it feels different. It feels different to you, but there's no principled way to distinguish it. And if it's the causal nature of it, then it should be all the way down, right? You say racist, so you'll be able to distinguish it and just bite the bullet and say, yeah, if it's causal, you can do all sorts of, you can restrict privileges, but you're not willing to do that because it doesn't feel good to say you can restrict a privilege in the interior of the country on the basis of viewpoint.
I keep trying to say, no. I keep trying to say that, like, when you're coming back into the country, the thing that you're getting is like a faster pass to be able to go through to where there isn't as much security.
You keep describing what global entry is. I don't need you to.
Hold on. I'm not. Hold on. I'm getting through the fucking sentence this time. So as you're going through, they want people that they have like a high amount of trust for to be able to get the privilege so that they bypass the security. Everybody else needs to go through the full process of security.
Yeah, and they say we trust white people more. They say we trust white people more. So because we trust white people more, black people need not apply. It's a limited group, and we trust white people more not to do this kind of thing.
I'm going to give the same answer,
which is it's not causal.
If you don't challenge the answer, I'm going to yes, that it's not causal. There's no case on that. It's not reasonable. There's no.
Yeah, but if the causal factor, the fact of causality, is sufficient to distinguish the racial discrimination at the level of global entry, why isn't it sufficient to distinguish the denial of driver's license, which is a privilege and which can be revoked for all sorts of minor shit? Why isn't the causal nature of the ideology as relates to driver's license different? Why is it different? Because
again, when you're coming out of the country, they are going to just the same.
Privileges,
it's like, no, hold on, wait, just listen. I don't care. You're not engaging with what I'm saying. I need you to actually engage this time. So I'm going to say this in a way that gets you to engage with it. When somebody comes in from outside of the country, they are getting searched. You do not have to have what is it called? A reasonable what's it called? Causal.
You don't need reasonable suspicion. You don't need a warrant. You don't need reasonable suspicion. Yeah, you don't need a warrant. It's accepted
because you're coming in from out of the country.
Oh my God.
Yes. So when you're coming from out of the country, I don't care if you're driving, I don't care if you're flying, I don't care if you're on a boat, they get to search you
for any reason.
Because
for any reason,
it's different.
For any reason, can they search you for any reason?
Always.
Okay, so they can.
Always.
Can they search you because you're a Jew?
They have to. They search everybody. They
no.
Search
I'm asking you.
They're going to search everybody.
But they don't need reasonable suspicion to stop you or search you. And some people get subject to more searches. And you're saying that they don't need any reason. Can they search you because you're a Jew?
No.
No. Right? So even though there's an exception to the Fourth Amendment, that is to say, you don't need reasonable suspicion, you don't need probable cause, you don't need a warrant to search, there are still unconstitutional searches that are plausible at borders, right? If you had a policy that said, we search black people extra, unconstitutional, notwithstanding the fact that the Fourth Amendment gives you this exception to reasonable suspicion and probable cause and a warrant requirement, there are still unjustifiable searches and seizures at the border, like a religiously discriminatory search at the border or viewpoint discriminatory searches at the border. For example,
even religiously discriminatory is something that is subjective. Like if my religion, all know that I have this religion where we all believe that everybody should bring drugs across the border. That's our religion. And we all fucking praise everybody because our religion believes that everyone should be bringing drugs across the border. And I've got this fucking logo posted right on the bumper of my car. Yeah, I think that is probably probable cause to be able to search this person a little bit more heavily than you might somebody else.
Okay, I think I understand. So if there were a new rule, it said, new rule for global entry, U.S. citizens that are Muslims can't get global entry. That would be acceptable, right? It's causative.
I don't think it is causative.
You think that religious ideology is not causative of actions?
I think religious ideology is. I don't think that that the religion is causative there.
Well, really?
I think that Yes, we have tons of Muslims in America, and there's the highest people who are engaging in terrorist activity within the country are white fucking Christians.
Wait a second, but for white Christians, that's not causative. White Christian isn't causative. But here, beliefs in martyrdom and Allah, that's causative.
Wait, Christians believe in martyrdom. Christians believe in dying for their religion.
So here's the question, right? Before you said Hasan's belief system is causative, and that's why you can deny, based on ideology for global entry, but you can't do it for race because race isn't causative, right? And you fought and you said, yeah, ideology actually motivates to action. The problem is now you have the religion. Religion is like ideology. Religion is a type of ideology. And so when I say to you, just like Hasan's belief, isn't it the case that religion is also causative of violence sometimes and terror threats, such as the religion of Islam?
Yeah, but I think religion is too broad. Like, that is just too broad. There is something more direct within that is causative, because the religion in and of itself, because people who believe in these things don't actually believe in like violent acts like this. They don't believe in going out and engaging in this way, even though it's part of their religion. They don't.
But a lot of people with Hasan's ideology,
and what they believe in, and they choose.
Yeah, but a lot of people with Hasan's ideology are also peaceful. Don't do violence. Don't do crimes. Hasan, I don't believe, has a criminal record. So a lot of Muslims don't commit violent acts, aren't committed to violence, aren't committed to criminality. Just like people with Hasan's ideology, whatever that is, aren't committed to violence or criminality. So it's on all fours.
Hold on. No. When you say committed to it, they believe in it. They believe that it's right. They believe it's justified. When we're talking about the Christians and Muslims, they don't believe in it. They don't believe it's right and justified. So it wouldn't be causal. It's totally separate.
Wait, but you can believe something is justified. I can believe that violence is justified or martyrdom is justified and not act on it.
Correct. Yes. But that's why I'm separating your analogy from what we're talking about, is that yes, even though it may not mean that they are 100% going to act on it, that it's still a very distinct type of causal
so belief in Allah,
differentiation.
Belief in Allah, belief in Islam, any given Sunni, not all of them are going to be motivated to ideology, but a lot of bad apples are going to be motivated to do these kinds of destructive acts based on their ideology. And so this is such a privilege, and because it's causative in the cases in which it shows up, right? Where it shows up, it's causative.
I'm not saying bad apples. I'm not saying this. You're making it sound like there's like, when we're talking about Christians, there's a bunch of Christians that all of a sudden just one day snap and go out and kill people. Whereas I'm talking about, if there's a group of Christians that believe we ought to do this thing, this is a good thing. They say consistently, we ought to go out and blow things up. We think it's good to take down planes. We think people deserved 9/11. Yes, I think that those sorts of people are very different because they actually believe this is right and justified, and they have agreed with the violence already. So that is very different.
So people who agree with the violence. Okay, so let me give you an example. So let's
say ideology, that's what I mean.
So let's say a bunch of people who support the violence that's occurring in Gaza. These kinds of people who support that wholesale, and that necessitates a lot of civilian death. Would it be okay for the government to say anyone who supports the Israeli violence that's occurring in Gaza cannot get global entry? Would that be acceptable?
The Israeli violence in Gaza?
Yeah.
No.
Why not?
It's because it's being committed by a government, not random individuals.
Wait a second. So what you're telling me is that the First Amendment standard about whether viewpoint discrimination is acceptable, you would say that a standard that incorporates ideology, advocacy in favor of violence, that we should treat the viewpoint discrimination differently based on whether your support for violence is manifested through a state versus a non-state actor, and that is relevant for whether viewpoint discrimination is acceptable. This is all bullshit ad hoc distinctions that don't matter dude.
How is that? Is Hasan a state actor? Is Hasan a state actor? Should we be more worried about him because he's a state actor? No, he's an individual. He is advocating for individualistic civilian terrorism. That is a distinction. You keep doing these things where you're trying to analogize things that are not.
Amendment? So if you support, let's say you supported Hitler's genocide, okay? You say, I think Hitler's genocide of the Jews is totally based. That's a state violence, right? State violence. And let's say that, and I think that it's justified when violence is committed against Jews. They say that, right? By the state. But they clarify by the state. If the government said, hey, people who support that aren't allowed to get global entry, would you support that? Would you say that's okay? That's state violence.
Probably not.
Why not?
Why would we?
So, because there, it's just on all fours with what I thought was the distinction. You said if you support state violence, it's different. You can't discriminate for people ideological support for violence if it comes from a state. And so why would you be okay?
Yes. Again, hold on. It's not just the state. It's a fact that, again, is the part that I keep trying to explain, is that, again, they are trying to get a heightened security on them when they come through, that they ought to be searched, that they ought to be checked, and that when you are coming from out of the country, that is more likely that you are going to. I know that's what I'm talking about as well, is that global entry stops you from being going through the quick pass where you have a lower level of security.
Every time you repeat what global entry is, everyone can see you're dodging. You don't need to recapitulate what global entry is after every answer. This is very clear. On the one hand, you said it would be unacceptable for discrimination for global entry. Yeah, for global entry. So price in your whole description. It would be unacceptable to say supporters of the Israeli violence against Gaza can't get global entry. You say that's unacceptable. And I said, why? It's support for violence. You just said ideological support for violence.
Because of the
utility No. You said because it's support for state violence, and support for state violence is different. And then I gave you the example. Well, what if you supported Nazi violence, state Nazi violence against Jews? And they started to say, hey, anyone who ideologically supports this kind of violence by the state against the Jews in the Nazi context, that you can't get global entry. You said that would be okay, right? But
no, I said it wouldn't. I said, why would we?
Oh, okay. So you think that it would be okay it would not be okay to discriminate against Nazis who support the Holocaust to get global entry?
Yeah, again, if there's no reason to believe that they need to go through a heightened level of security when coming in from out of the country, there's no reason to send them.
So this feels like special pleading. I'll tell you why. You're literally saying that that it's more justified to discriminate on global entry to someone with Hasan's ideology than a literal Holocaust supporter and someone who supports Adolf Hitler.
Okay, why does CBP discriminate at all? Why at all? Why do they discriminate for global entry?
Wait, can you address what the fuck I just said and not dodge it? That is what you just said, right?
I am, but I think that you're dodging yes, I am saying that. Now, why does CBP discriminate at all? Why did they do that at all?
I have no idea. It depends. It depends on the context. Many different reasons.
Like what?
So when you say discriminate, I take that to be viewpoint discrimination?
No, I mean, why do they discriminate at all? Like, my understanding is that this is all security issues, which means that they want you to go through a heightened level of searches and crap like that, you're not going through a quick pass to bypass that.
Broadly, CBP seems to be concerned with, they have multiple mandates. They have the mandate of importation of goods into the country to make sure that they're enforcing tariffs and duties, security into the country to make sure they're enforcing the immigration law, and also enforcement sometimes of other law when it comes to outstanding warrants. And so multiple different purposes that might cause them to broadly discriminate in the sense of that's a suspicious package. This person has a criminal record. If what you mean is not viewpoint discrimination, but a broader sense of discrimination, they fulfill multiple mandates. And so your question, very simple question, has many answers, which is it depends. And CBP has many mandates.
Yeah. So again, my understanding is that it's all security related, and that the reason that people have to apply for it is for a security related pass, so that they know that this person is trusted to bypass security, and that this is only like something that they do for people who have a very high level of trust, and then everybody else has to go through the higher level of security.
Hasan is not a terrorist. He has no criminal record, and the reason you said it's okay to deny global entry is because he ideologically supports violence. But the example I gave you of a Nazi also ideologically supports violence.
Well, again, when you're saying that they advocate for it through the state, that they would just vote for the state to be doing this, but they're not willing to go out and do what Nazis did, which is
Hasan
just beat up a bunch of Jews in the street and shit like that, then these are different. Whereas Hasan is supporting groups like the Houthis that are these random pirates that are getting on ships and going out and engaging in terroristic activities as just random people.
That's a dumb
This is a
distinction.
thing that he thinks is good and justified.
Yeah, and Israel does, even though they're organized in, I guess, a different way than the Houthis in the sense that they're internationally recognized, they also conduct violence that kills innocent people, and there are people who support that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so the distinction is whether it's a state actor or not state actor, even if you support horrible violence by the state?
Because supporting the state does not make it to where we would think it's more likely that you're going to need a heightened level of security coming in from another country.
But why does supporting violence on behalf of non-state actors indicate that tendency? And again, now you're talking about tendency, not causative. You're just talking about percentages, and so I don't understand the empirical basis to make that distinction. But even
wait, I'm not talking about percentages. I didn't say percentages.
So
where did you get that from?
So why does one's support?
Why did you even say that? Where did they get that from?
Well, because the other conclusion is not good for your position, which is where are you getting that abstract support in favor of non-state violence is causative of or likely to lead to criminal violence on the people who espouse that, as opposed to ideological supporters of state violence. I just don't understand where you're getting the notion that the kind of support that Hasan provides to non-state actors, it has a greater causative connection to the actual deployment, his actual deployment of some kind of illegal violence or something, versus all else equal, someone supporting a state sanctioned violence. That's what I'm asking.
Oh, sure. I mean, if you want to take it to percentages, yeah, we could say that somebody who believes in non-state actors engaging in political violence is going to be much more likely to engage in political violence than somebody who doesn't.
Where's the empirics for that?
I would say just about everybody who's engaged in political violence believed in engaging in political violence.
Wait, but someone who supports a state doing political violence would also believe in political violence. I'm asking you, where is the empirical evidence that someone who supports violence from non-state actors, political violence, you just
I don't know how you're still getting these two things mixed up. So when we're talking about the state doing something, I'm not worried about this individual bringing in weapons or anything, or engaging, bringing anything in, because they leave that to the state. But if these individuals believe in taking this into their own hands and doing this themselves, they are going to be more likely to bring these things in for other civilians. Have you heard of the
Soviet Union? Remember the Soviet Union? There are a lot of people who said, well, if you support communist Russia, you're more likely to smuggle things in, to be a saboteur. And so I don't know where you're getting. Right now we're at war with Iran.
Well, I'm not making that argument.
So what if you support Iran? Let's say someone is avowed support for Iran, says Iran is justified in attacking American citizens. Iran is justified in attacking Israel as a state, organized violence. You would therefore agree that anyone who advocates for Iran and using state violence, political state violence by Iran, you cannot deny them global entry on the basis of their support for Iran, correct?
Yeah, I don't know why you would.
But Iran supports terrorism. Iran could attack American citizens. Iran could be sponsoring saboteurs.
Well, if you're saying
Iran could be
because you
sponsoring
support
agents.
Iran, but yes, if you're saying by extension because you support Iran, you also support Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, then yes, now it's because you support Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, not because you support Iran.
Put aside the proxies. Wouldn't there be a state interest if American citizens publicly are avowing support for the Islamic Republic? Wouldn't we be more heightened concerned of, like, now Iran is saying they're going to attack Americans, that it's no holds barred. Why wouldn't this kind of, if you really care about the safety of Americans, shouldn't CBP consider an American support for Iran as a relevant consideration for global entry?
Yeah, I think that like people who believe in like individuals going out and handling things themselves is a different type of thought process than people who would
Whether it's
leave it to governments
whether
to take care of these things.
maybe it's different. I don't have an opinion about whether it's different in that sense, but grant that it's different. Why does it matter for CBP? Who's to say one is worse or better? Why would it matter for your First Amendment analysis, which is acceptable? You would say, okay, I will discriminate
I'm
against
not
people.
doing First Amendment analysis.
Well,
I'm
that's what
saying
I'm
that
doing.
these people are a heightened security risk, and so because they're a heightened security risk, it makes it there is a utility, as I've said the entire time, reasonability, utility, that like there is utility to actually sending them through heightened security rather than giving them this high level of trust and letting them bypass this.
And that's not true of people who support like China, Iran, Russia.
How would it be?
Because people who support
I can be convinced me
Iran,
that they shouldn't have it either.
People who support Iran, China, and Russia probably are more likely to be foreign agents who are illegally, stealing American secrets, maybe are saboteurs, maybe are deniable terrorists. There were even, by the way, accusations and even indictments that Iranians were planning an assassination of Trump on American soil. There have been assassinations that have been organized by like India in Canada that broke down relations there. Other countries that are state actors have embedded agents into this country. And so why would this distinction rest on whether or not you support non-state actors versus state actors? And I think the difference is, I said Israel, and all of a sudden you're like, no, you obviously can't discriminate global entry based on your support for Israel. And now you're stuck on it.
I said the same thing for Iran.
I know. And you
said the same thing for Iran.
And you said the same thing for the Nazis, but you're having to defend this line because it feels like special pleading. You're just trying to get to Hasan. That's what it feels like. It feels like
it's not special pleading. It's reasonability. All of this comes down to reasonability. Even when we talk about First Amendment, is it legal to say I have weed in my car? Yes, you're allowed to say I have weed in my car. Does that mean that it's not now reasonable for the cop to want to come search you? Yes, this is reasonable that the cop will come search your car now. But you can say it. It's still a heightened level of security to push them to go and put you through heightened security.
If you come out and you say, I support weed legalization, I love weed legalization, I think weed should be plentiful in America, and that's your political belief, and you're coming back from abroad, on the basis of that belief, should CBP be allowed to search you extra?
Probably not. No.
Why not? Their mandate isn't just security, it's also contraband. Someone who ideologically supports weed is more likely to smuggle weed in, right? If it's causative, it's probably causative.
Maybe I would say like if you have support for like cartels and things like that, then yes, I would say that is more causative than just like the general belief.
No, you support legalization of weed. No, I didn't say anything about cartels.
Right, I know. That's why I said no to your answer to your question, and then gave like a caveat to where I would support it.
Okay, but even though CBP, even though that belief, weed legalization could be causative of smuggling, it could be that someone who supports weed legalization is more friendly towards weed, more likely to like weed, and maybe more likely to try to make the American people accept weed more and thereby bring weed in. That's the same kind of analysis you're deploying for Hasan's views.
It is, I to an extent, sure, but I find that to be like less reasonable, yeah.
Okay.
Because we're talking about the majority of the country now. We're talking about like, I think the majority of the country thinks that weed should be legal in America, and
so now
there are states where it's legal here,
factor?
but there aren't states where like terrorism is. No, it's reasonability.
So another factor
have something to do with being something being reasonable. These aren't another factor.
The percentage support for something that could be illegal, right? A lot of people support Luigi Mangione. Not majorities, but a lot of people support Luigi Mangione.
You're playing this game where you're doing the what is it called, something's Loki's wager, where like because I can't draw like specific lines on reasonability, that I am telling you, yes, these things obviously are more or less reasonable based on the distinctions that you're giving, and that like one is highly is going to be more causal than the other. That's just as reasonable. But now you're like giving me these other things that are very different and going to be drastically like even percentage wise different. I'm
not doing that. I'm trying to get some kind of neutral test that where I can predict, perhaps. I'm not trying to get to do a Loki's wager type thing. What are the things you look to, right? What are the kinds of things? In the course of this conversation, we've looked to a bunch. One is whether the belief could be causative of some kind of misconduct. Another is whether or not the thing that you're supporting is state versus non-state. Whether or not the thing you just said is upheld by like a large number of American citizens. You said most people in America support weed. I don't know why that affects the analysis. And so I'm not trying to pinpoint like one hard case where it's not clear. I'm trying to even just look at the broad set of factors that you look to see whether or not something is okay or not. I'm not trying to like remove grains of sand here. I'm looking at what I take to be examples, hypotheticals.
Yes, but I think the reasonability between the two are so drastic that if you're not willing to admit this, then it has to be Loki's wager, because it doesn't make sense if you can't acknowledge that somebody who just supports weed legalization like the majority of America is different than somebody who believes that in terrorism.
Replace everything that Hasan said about Houthis with Iran. I'm 10 toes down for Islamic Republic. I think Iran should be attacking Israel. I don't know that Hasan is saying that Houthis should be attacking civilians, but even just grant that he did say that. Let's say that Iran, he's like, I think that Iran should be attacking civilians. So it replace all that with Iran. You would say not justified to deny global entry on that basis. And the basis, and the reason you're saying that is because
I think he has said that about.
Okay, fine. I grant it. I grant it. But like, okay, you're saying you would not revoke global entry for the person who is on all else equal with Hasan, but it's Iran. And the reason is someone who's all else equal with respect to Iran is less likely to do X than Hasan. Fair?
Yes, because they're leaving it to the state, whereas people because Hezbollah people are, because the people who leave it to the state, if they're not part of the state, like this is very different. Whereas if they are in favor of individuals acting, and I'm blanking on the word, but it's like a Batman, like Spider-Man, like all these people who go out and do things themselves instead of calling the cops. Yes, that is like almost like vigilanteism.
Yeah, but what's the empirical case that someone in Hasan's position is more or less likely to employ vigilanteism than a Hasan who's supportive of Iran as opposed to these other groups? I don't understand why you can make the claim that one has a greater tendency towards any kind of thing than another. I think that just feels. It's not based in any kind of empirical claim. Even though Hasan has a very, and this is in the chat, Hasan has a very low likelihood of doing the crime himself.
Yeah, but I don't know what the empirics are on somebody who says I have weed in my car. They actually, whether or not they actually have weed in their car. But I think it's reasonable to believe that that is the case.
If someone makes an assertion, that they are currently doing misconduct, that's not abstract support for something. It's an admission that they are doing the thing itself, which is prohibited. That's very different than saying I support. Like imagine you're at the board and say, do you support weed legalization? Yes, I do. Open your bag. Different than saying, do you have weed in your car? Yes. One is the misconduct itself, and the other is you're making an assumption that based on this viewpoint, he's likely to do X. That's the viewpoint discrimination.
Right, but these are, I think this is even in case law. They're like the level of harm that comes from a discrimination versus like the utility in it, that like you have to weigh both versus each other. So even with your like car example, that like somebody's not being able to get to work on time, or like that they have that they'll have like a lot more weight put on their shoulders to get things done without a car versus not being able to go through global entry. We wouldn't feel like this is some like huge weight on them to where they're now you're missing out on something great.
Yeah. So now you're bringing back the global entry being like this kind of heightened privilege. Who cares about it? But again, you do care about it in the context of saying someone.
Well, I'm not just using the word like privilege, but yes, I'm saying that like there are like actual lines I think that are drawn here.
Where you're backing up. We're in the world in which we're talking about the revocation of global entry specifically. And so we're not comparing to anything else. We're just comparing to different things that revoke global entry. So you don't need to back up and say, well, global entry is very special, very special, very, very, very special. I'm already operating in your framework, which is fucking stupid, by the way. This is dumb. This distinction is totally meaningless. It's based on your priors about the Fourth Amendment. But again, grant what you say about the Fourth Amendment. It doesn't mean that there can't be violations of other rights just because there's an exception to the Fourth Amendment. And so we're working in the framework in which global entry is this very, 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 very special, different thing. That said, I have to bounce in a second. I'll give you the last word. I do appreciate the conversation. I think that there's at least a lot of common ground on the Ethan discussion. And I think if you examine the Hasan thing a little bit more, you would find that it should be troublesome to you. And these kinds of distinctions that you're offering, state versus non-state, causative versus correlation, this stuff isn't really. This is ad hoc, and it seems backward facing to match with a kind of. Well,
I'll say,
feels like a
I don't know
threat.
if this has ever been challenged in court at all. But this is literally everything that even CBP states on their website. That is like what they're doing, what they're looking for, and that this is kind of the thought process that they're going through. And so when they're stating this outright, yes, this seems to be the process that is accepted. And if it hasn't been challenged in court, then maybe one day it will be, and I'll be totally wrong. But as of right now, yes, like it seems to be the legal and trusted thought process from the government. So.
Hey, Tom, thank you so much for chatting, dude. We should talk again soon. I enjoy our conversations. I really appreciate also when we have disagreements. I feel like we don't get like negative of each other. Like I'll call you shit head or whatever, but I don't take it personally. I don't think you take it personally. So
you did call me a bitch when you told me to get in the VC.
I did do that. I hope you don't
find out. I will get on a plane next time. And
so now you should get denied global entry. Anyway, thank you so much for the conversation, and let's talk again soon at some point.